I will now be sharing my screen at this point. So, do you see my screen now? Do you see my screen now?
Yes po.
Okay, so first, of course, from the list of the topics that we're going to cover will be something about the etymology or the origin of the word literature, and a few definitions of a few very good definitions of literature from different authors, different people, different renowned people or literary artists. So let's begin with the first definition here. The word literature has its origin from the French word littera, which means literature, or belles letters, which means beautiful writing. And in general, we define the word literature as a form of art that deals with ideas, thoughts, and emotions of men. Thus, it can be said that the literature is the story of a man, and if you are a feminist, a woman too. Okay, so that's how we define the word literature. It deals with the emotion, ideas, and thoughts, especially emotions of people. And because literature use words, it's the words are presented, the words are crafted in such a way that it provides aesthetic pleasure to the reader. Is it clear? It provides aesthetic pleasure to readers. Can you follow?
Yes po.
Mhm. Another definition of literature is, in its broadest sense, is everything that has ever been written. And this is one of the many definitions of literature that allows or that involves the categorization of other pieces of writing as a form of its own. And like what it says, it's in the broadest sense. Literary pieces like poems, novels, and other materials are strictly called literature, but you can also call different set of texts as literature because they're written. The best way to understand human nature fully and to know a nation completely is to study literature. I want to know your ideas for number three. Why did Garcia in 1993 um, say or remarked that the best way to understand human nature fully and to know a nation completely is to study its literature? Why is that? Matthew, can you explain number three, please?
For me, sir, because humans express their emotions through expressions such as writing. So therefore, we can know someone or know a nation from what they are from their written scriptures,
Okay,
from their written text. Right?
that's a good answer. And if we talk about knowing a nation's profile, a nation's story, it's always good to know it's always good to look at and reflect into their own literature. That's why our own literatures in the Philippines have been preserved by the National Commission of Arts because it reflects how rich our country is, the heritage and the sufferings, the things that make the Filipino people, right? We have our own set of great writers, great artists that can be that are actually at par with international authors as well. So we have a crop of Filipino writers who are brilliant, who are prolific, who are talented, and who has written a lot, so much about our country's sufferings, our country's conditions, all throughout the history. And of course, it's the best way to understand human nature because literary pieces reflect us, right? Just like in Aristotle's words, right? What did Aristotle said about art? Art is a representation of life, right? According to Aristotle, art is a representation of life. And so, what literature does is it provides us a channel, a platform, an outlet to show human nature fully. And when we say fully, we're not just looking at the best, best versions of people, but also the totality, the holistic characteristic of people na merong duality, di ba? We always see duality in human nature. May mabait, meron din namang mga bad sides ang isang tao. So we see a character in a literary piece, for example, a short story or a novel, or in a film, right? We see a character 360 degrees. Steven, is it okay now? Let's move on to the next definition. The best way to, through literature, we learn the innermost feelings and thoughts of people, the most real part of themselves. Thus, we gain an understanding not only of others, but more importantly of ourselves and of life itself. What does this definition say? This is a really good way of putting, or of defining the word literature. Matthew, can you talk about your thoughts on number four? Matthew.
Sir, from what I understand from number four, because it said literature, in through literature we learn the innermost feelings and thoughts of people. Like what I said earlier, we express our emotions through expressions, and one of those expressions is like art or, in a sense, literature. So if we express our emotions through what we write, therefore, we can, uh, how do you say this? Know a person better or know their innermost personalities with what they are writing.
That's a
That's
wonderful answer, Matthew. That's correct. Art is in it, in it. Sorry. Art is in and of itself an expression of our personalities, the expression of our identities, right? Any form of art is basically, it boils down to people's expressions, and literature is a form of art. And so when we read a literary piece or when we write something, we don't write just for the sake of writing, but we try to incorporate our opinions, our biases, our ideas and emotions in a creative manner, in a creative way, so that we express ourselves well. Number five, literature offers us an experience in which we should participate as we read and test what we read by our own experience. And Judy, do you agree with number five? Judy? Judy. Judy, hello. Are you here?
Hello. Sir, Judy and Bayona is having trouble with her connection po. So
Sino pang pwede mag-recite?
currently she's asking if she's still in the meeting.
Oh, she's still here, right? Y-
No, I don't think she is.
I can see her name here on the list. I think she is in.
Mm. But
She's just not responding.
she can't hear anything.
Ah, okay. How about you, Juan? You, Juan, what is your, what are your thoughts on the fifth item here? You, Juan, Mercado. You, Juan. Yuan, what are your thoughts on the fifth item? Literature offers us an experience in which we should participate as we read and test what we read by our own experience. What are your thoughts in this? Oh, well, you can type your answer on the chat box. Matthew, while we're waiting for your answer, Matthew, can you please explain or can you please tell me what your thoughts are on the fifth item here? Thank you.
Am I, can you hear me po?
Yes.
Yun. So, in number five po, it says that literature offers us an experience in which we should participate as we read and test what we read by our own experience. From what I understand in this sentence po, when we read about something, we often see scenarios and experiences written down by other people.
Mm-hmm.
Therefore, when we read it, we often compare our own experiences with what we read. Therefore, we know that it's real and we learn from it po.
Exactly. Diba? When we participate in a reading experience, it's an active engagement, right? It's not something passive. We learn from films, we learn from what we read, and in a way, it helps us to understand and realize things that would otherwise be somehow um sometimes even risky for us to do, right? For example, if we don't understand how a specific unknown experience will affect or how it will affect us, then reading a piece of literature about that a person experienced specifically on the same matter you'd like to do would save you from any risky you know, risky effect that it might bring you, right?
Yes.
Okay. And when you read something, it's important that you not only that you just don't you not simply just absorb everything. Okay. You also have to test. You also have to think critically whether what you're writing, whether what you're reading is true, and um, if it's something that you should believe in, and if it's something that you should um, follow. Okay, let's proceed to number six. Literature does not yield much unless we bring something of ourselves to it. I like this specific definition to of literature, and I'd like to know your thoughts about this, Mr. Lasalista, Stephen Dave. Can you can you please tell us your thoughts about number six? Dave, you won. Can we go back to you now? Okay, Matthew.
Yes po.
Number six, please.
Mm. So in number six po, what I understand from it, well, in the sentence, literature does not yield much unless we bring something of ourselves to it. I think po, what this sentence means is that if we are not interested in what we are reading, we cannot fully understand it po. I think that's the simplified version of what this text is saying po.
So you have to bring a piece of yourself to it. Means that when you read a literary piece, you have to understand it from your own perspective, and that you have to, in a so to speak, you have to converse. You have to have an internal conversation with the text you're reading. Okay, it's not a passive experience. Reading a literary piece is not a passive experience. It's something that you do actively. It's something that you engage in. It's something that you not just pass through your eyes and through your brains, but it's something that you digest. Okay. Now, number seven states that literature is a faithful reproduction of life. In a sense, it is a product and a commentary on life process. Number eight, literature illuminates life. It reflects our life struggles, our life's experiences. Literature is our life story, including its struggles, ideas, failures, sacrifices, and happiness. We see that a lot when we read a certain piece of literature that moves us, when we see a film that moves us, makes us cry, makes us think of our choices in life. Have you ever have you ever seen a film that spoke so much to you that made you realize something? Because I have a few times, as a teacher, as a student, as a person. There are movies that will not just blow your mind, but will make you realize at the end of the day or at the end of the film that there's value behind it. It's not just an entertainment an expression or a reproduction of a slice of life, but there is a value behind it, and it teaches you to realize something. Have you ever come across a specific movie or a specific piece of literature that moved you?
Series po, series.
Matthew, can you tell us about that quickly?
Um, are you familiar with the series of Lucifer po?
The what?
Lucifer po.
Yeah, I can see it on Netflix, but I haven't really watched an episode of that. But can you
Mm,
tell us briefly how it moved you?
um, may, not literally moved. Of course, not literally. Not really moved me. Just I can see that in the film, I can see that there are like lessons that you should learn from them. Because in each episode, the characters come across a problem. Then at the end of each episode, they simplify everything that they went through, and they have a realization of life where they either they should be good, it should be like not everything is fair like that po.
Yes, 'di ba? Yung mga maganda sa mga series, no, it makes you realize something at the end of the story, that there is value, even even a situation that is so stressful, even in situations that we might see the worst from people, 'di ba? We can still get something from it. We can still get a value. can still learn from these experiences vicariously. I just wanted to use that word, by the way, vicariously. Sorry,
Sir, what
vicariously.
word?
Vicariously,
Huh?
vicarious experience. Pag sinabi nating vicariously, or you live something vicariously, it's a secondary experience. Parang you're living something, you're experiencing something not on first-hand basis, but on a secondary basis. So when you watch a film and you see a person who is experiencing things the same way as you do, you live that experience vicariously by looking or by watching how the character um, responds to the situations where he or she is in. Is it clear? Is it clear?
Sir po. Yes po.
Parang si Matthew na lang yata yun. Yuan, are you still here? Yuan, Judy, tatatlo na lang tayo.
Sir, ang problema po kasi dito, si Judy Ann po, naka-data. Tinry niya po lumabas ng bahay nila para magkaroon ng mas stronger connection. Ewan ko lang po kung ano na nangyari. Si
Ah,
Yuan po, medyo mahina rin yung connection. Tapos si Steven po,
ah.
nawalan sila ng wifi, nakiki-hotspot na lang po kaya pawala-wala.
Bakit mo alam? I don't, saan mo nakukuha yung impormasyon mo?
Sa
Wala.
messenger po.
Alat sa messenger ba?
Yes
Saan?
po.
Ah, okay. Alright, it's here. Mahirap
Sinasabi po
talagang,
nila sa akin.
hirap talaga online class, no? Anyway, meron namang recording ito. I can upload it on YouTube and they can listen to it. Is it okay, Matthew, that they'll be hearing your answers as well?
Sure po, sir.
Okay, so let's now proceed to the 10th definition of literature. Literature appeals to man's higher nature and its needs emotional, spiritual, intellectual, and creative. Like all other forms of art, literature entertains and gives pleasure. It fires the imagination and arouses noble emotions, and it enriches man by enabling him to reflect on life and by filling him with new ideas. I really, really love the way how this definition was put. It's a very, very apt definition of literature. It provides you a stimulation emotionally, mentally, spiritually. It makes you realize things, it makes you experience things vicariously. It entertains you, but it also allows you to imagine. It provides you that platform, that outlet to discover yourselves and understand the meaning of life. Okay? Let's move on to the next definition. One of the seven arts. Yes, yes, and yes. Now, the ability to be a judge of literature is based on the application of certain recognizable standards of good literature. Great literature is distinguishable of the following qualities. According to Garcia in 1993, he mentioned that a good piece of literature has specific characteristics. Okay? Merong mga katangian para masabi natin ng isang piece of literature is of good quality. Okay? The first one is artistry, quality which appeals to our sense of beauty. Earlier, I mentioned aesthetic pleasure, and literary pieces, like other forms of art, provides us aesthetic pleasure. Can you give me an example of other forms of art that provides us aesthetic pleasure, Matthew?
Um, uh, has drawing been ano na po? Has drawing been given na po?
Yes, ano ba yung mga forms of art? We have seven, I believe. Painting is a form of art, okay, and it
Yes po.
provides us a
Painting,
aesthetics.
architecture, sculpting,
And correct.
uh,
Dance is also a
litera
form of art.
folk literature,
Music.
uh, yes po, music,
Mm,
dance, and uh, architecture.
mm-hmm.
painting,
Uh-huh.
tapos ay, nakalimutan ko na yung iba po, sir, sorry.
So yun, I think all the forms of art provides us a sense of beauty. Okay, my sense of beauty doon. The second one is intellectual value. A literary work stimulates thought and it enriches our mental life by making us realize fundamental truths about life and human nature. Okay, makes us think, makes us realize how makes us human basically, diba? It provides us an intellectual value. It has intellectual value on its own because it enriches us, it makes us think, it makes us curious, it makes us realize that the human person is actually a very complex person, no? Hindi lang siya isang tao na nabubuhay, na humihinga. Pero ang isang tao ay complex. He or she is in itself a form of art too, right? He has experiences, he has realizations, he responds to different situations in a different manner. And while they do that, we understand their inner personalities, their inner thoughts. Number three is just suggestiveness. This is the quality associated with the emotional power of literature, such that it should move us deeply and stir our creative imagination, giving and evoking vision beyond the plane of ordinary life and experience. Yes, that's right. So when we say suggestiveness, it will make us feel deeply about the emotional prowess, emotional power of literature. Kaya di ba pag nanonood tayo ng film minsan or when we're reading something, we get so engrossed. We get so deep into reading. We get so involved into watching because nandun yung aesthetic pleasure. But at the same time, it also captures, our attention. It grips our emotion. It provides us that value. It provides us a vision of life beyond ordinary life and experience. Spiritual value, on the other hand, refers to elevating the spirit by bringing out moral values, which makes us better persons. This capacity to inspire is part of the spiritual value of literature. Number five is permanence. A great work of literature endures. It can be read again and again as each reading gives fresh delight and news and new insights and open new worlds of meaning and experience. Can you please explain this, Matthew? What is permanence in literature? When is a literary piece permanent?
I'm not sure with what I understood with it po, sir. Pero I think from what it says, it's like whenever you read something, it feels like it never gets old.
Mm-hmm.
Like it's always interesting and it's always like related with the world. Like I think a good example of this is the Bible po.
Mm-hmm.
Like it's old but it doesn't feel old because we always find a way to relate it with our life at like
Mm-hmm.
today.
Tama. Ang mga tao naman, pare-parehas ng experiences. I mean, what I'm trying to say is we have unique experiences, but these experiences share similarities, right? And so I like your example, Matthew, and I would like to use that example again with number six later. Permanence is a good literature has permanence, meaning that the values and the experiences, the themes the central ideas that is embedded in a story, for example, or in a poem, is something that can be felt again and again, can be interpreted in very different ways, in different manners, because it will provide us a fresh perspective about the text or about the literary piece. Moving on to number six, universality. Great literature is timeless and timely, forever relevant in terms of its theme and conditions. Kaya Di ba yung Holy Bible, you mentioned that earlier. Bakit pa natin binabasa yung Holy Bible? Because the experiences and the lessons that we get from that book is something that people would still realize or would still learn from, could still learn from until now. May mga pinapanood tayo mga film na um, kahit na maluma na sila, di ba? And we watch them, we still realize things, and it provides us a better understanding of ourselves and of the world that we are in. Is it clear?
Yes po. Clear po.
So, those are the standards of good literature. Now, let's move on to the two main divisions of literature according to Nuggets in 2004. There are two forms, prose and poetry, and they can be differentiated by four aspects: form, language, appeal, and aim. So prose is basically written in paragraph form, while poetry is written in stanza or verse form. Language used in prose is expressed in ordinary language, while in poetry it's expressed in metrical, rhythmical, and figurative language. The appeal is to the intellect for prose, and for poetry to the emotion. And the main aim of prose is to convince, inform, instruct, imitate, and reflect, while poetry is to stir the imagination and set an ideal of how life should be. Are there any questions about the differences between the main divisions of literature? May tanong ba dito?
None po.
Okay, nothing. So that will be the end of our discussion on the definition of literature based on different people and the standards of literature, two main divisions of literature. Now we move on to the next topic, which is, um, hold on, please. Philippine. We will start with a discussion on the history of Philippine literature. Of course, when we're going back to history, we'll start from the very first, from the very beginning, of the Philippine literary tradition. What is the literature of the Philippines, diba? When we say Philippine literature, what is that? Okay? So do you see my screen, students?
Yes po.
Okay, so we will start by looking at the history of the Philippine literature during the pre-colonial period. So our class goals would be to identify the geographic, linguistic, and ethnic dimensions of Philippine literary history from pre-colonial to contemporary period, and familiarize oneself with the early Philippine literary tradition. So our first question in mind would be, what is Philippine literature? What constitutes Philippine literature? So Philippine literature is anything, or it refers to the body of works, both oral and written, that Filipinos, whether native, naturalized, or foreign-born, have created about the experiences of living in or relating to the Philippine society. And one thing that should be highlighted here is the agent. Who are the agents? Who are the writers of Philippine literature? It can be anyone as long as you are a native Filipino, a naturalized Filipino, or even if you were born in a different soil. For example, you're a Filipino American who is writing still about the Philippines, then that would be considered part of the the rich body of Philippine literature. And one thing that you should also remember is that it involves not only written but also oral Philippine literary tradition. It is composed in any of the Philippine languages. It may be produced anywhere in the Philippines and foreign lands where a Filipino where Filipino migrants live. Forms may be indigenous or borrowed from other cultures and may address mass audiences or the intellectual elite. So, when we think about Philippine literature, we should not be boxed into thinking that Philippine literature is only written in Filipino, but in different languages existing in the Philippines. So, Ilocano literature, Bicolano literature. Yan nga yung mga gandang literature, guys, eh. Yung mga sa mga regional literatures natin na sa tingin ko ay hindi natin nabibigyan masyado ng pansin because we always are fans of writers abroad, 'di ba? Parang we always read the works of other people abroad, but we tend to we tend to forget that we have our own rich heritage of literature here, not only written in Filipino but in different languages as well. Like I was born in Manila, but I grew up in Isabela, which is in region 2, and we have a lot of literature. We have preserved the local government has preserved forms of early literature back in the day, and that is considered still a part of Philippine literature. Now, let's begin our. We trace back the history of Philippine literature first, of course, during the pre-colonial period. When we say pre-colonial period, this is before the Spaniards came to the Philippines, and this is what we call the ethnic tradition. Pre-colonial period is characterized by oral lore. Ibig sabihin, oral pa lang siya kasi as you can remember, wala pang printing press during this time in history. So the way the literary pieces during this time were composed basically of oral lores, and it circulated within contemporary communities of tribal Filipinos or among lowland Filipinos that have maintained their links with the culture of their non-Islamic or non-Christian ancestors. So, of course, ang nauna naman na religion sa ating bansa is Islam. So there are early accounts or early records of literature in the Philippines that are Islamic in nature. But there are also literary pieces that have non-Islamic references. For example, yung mga Bathala, yung mga Kabunyan. So animism, yung pagpaniniwala or pagsasamba sa mga elements of nature that we see around. So we have early records of those literary pieces in the country. Philippine ethnic literature is a rich repository of ideals, and sentiments preserved through centuries of oral transmission.
Sir,
Yes?
ask ko lang po, nililipat niyo po ba yung slide?
Yes. Bakit? Hindi niyo ba siya
Ah,
nakikita?
ngayon lang po siya nag-switch, kanina po nasa title.
Ah, really? I'm sorry. Ayan siya, oo. Kita niyo na.
Yes po.
Ayan. Okay.
Thank you po.
So there are three classifications of the ethnic tradition in the country: folk speech, folk songs, and folk narratives. And we will talk about this siguro more, or probably I'll do a video presentation on this because we're already running out of time. We have 8 minutes left on the clock, but I think that will wrap up my discussion for today's lecture. Do you have any questions, students?
None po.
How about the others?
Hello po, sir. Sorry po. Nan po.
Okay, so medyo marami naman tayong na-cover this time. So we covered different meaning or different definitions of literature and standards of a good literature, the two main divisions of lit, and now we're going through oral literature, Philippine literary history or Philippine literary tradition. I hope that we'd be able to finish this kasi medyo mahaba ito siguro next week. so that we can start reading literary pieces na. Okay?
Okay po.
Any questions, Yuan, Judy, Matthew?
None na po.
Itong ano, yung YouTube channel niyo po.
Ah, yes. I-send ko na lang yung link sa ano nyo, sa group chat nyo, okay?
Thank you po.
So I'll see you next time, students, and it's good to have finally met you, and we will probably be with each other, or yeah, with one another for a few more weeks until your teacher comes in. I had a great time talking to you today, and I hope you did too. I'll see you next time. Goodbye.
Thank you po, sir.
You may now leave.